And on to our second talk. The title is Three's Company, 3 Years Later, Navigating a Shared ArchivesSpace Instance, presented by Elizabeth Parker, Katerina Dimitriadou Shuster, and Chiyong Tali. Elizabeth, she, her, is a technical services archivist for the Kheel Center for Labor Management Documentation and Archives at Cornell University Library, where she leads the unit that processes, describes, and makes available the collections held at the Kheel Center. She's overseeing the migration of the Kheel Center's data into the shared ArchivesSpace instance and adapting workflows to better fit the needs of a shared instance. Katerina Dimitriadou Shuster is a director for archival technical services at Cornell University Library and oversees all operations of a unit working on archival collections from the rare and manuscript collections at the Kroc Asia Collections. Chiyong Tali, she, her, is the technical services archivist at the Medical Center Archives of NewYork-Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center. She is responsible for all aspects of collection management and shares reference, outreach, and other departmental responsibilities. Her current priority is modernizing institutional archival practices and workflows, including migrating all collections information into ArchivesSpace. And with that, I will hand it off to Elizabeth.
I can get it started. This is Katerina. Thank you, Jennifer. And again, this is Katerina Dimitriadou Shuster. And just going to mention only that although we work on both Kroc Asia and Rare Manuscript collections, most of the decisions were made with RMC, which is Rare Manuscript Collections short. So I will be referring to everything, all the decisions made as they are for RMC. So 3 years ago, we presented at this event on what was then the first steps of what we knew was going to be a long-term partnership. The challenges we all were faced were different based on where everyone was on our journey. RMC was in ArchivesSpace for 3 years already, and all settings and workflows for the system were based on RMC needs and decisions. These were not necessarily the best options for the other two institutions, especially for Kheel, that had a long-established system and workflows that had to be retrofit to the existing settings, and Weill had less established settings, but again had to follow decisions that may not have been the best or the easiest for their existing needs. So where are we 3 years later? We'll each do our part. So for RMC, when RMC was the only institution and in the midst of the pandemic and the library-wide transition to folio, technical support for the relatively new ASpace workflows was extremely limited. As a result, technical challenges were left unaddressed, resulting in workflow disruptions and staff frustration. Certain updates were manual, our integration to Kayasoft, the system our offsite storage is using, there were malfunctioning, and offsite shipments were piling up. We had to wait for a long overdue system upgrade to accommodate the timeline of one of the other two repositories integrations. And ID support was focused primarily on them and not RMC's needs. So we focused our attention on resolving content and documentation issues and assisted with the integration of the other two repositories as much as we could, and whatever we could to the integration with the other systems that ASpace would have to work with, because we use Folio as our library system and Aeon for circulation. And then there's also Kayasoft, which is used by our offsite storage facility. And all those systems need to work together. One of the first major decisions we made collectively was to activate the PUI. Although it was definitely the right choice, past data decision in RMC had been made to map into static HTML finding aids and not the PUI. And this would come back to haunt us in the future. I'm now going to pass it on to Liz.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. My name is Elizabeth Parker, and I'm the Technical Services Archivist at the Kheel Center for Labor Management, Documentation, and Archives. And thank you for allowing us to return 3 years later to discuss where we are in our shared ASpace instance. As part of preparing for this talk, I forced myself to listen to the talk we gave 3 years ago, your own voice. And it has given me perspective on just how far we have come because it is so easy to focus on setbacks and snags and not appreciate the significant progress we've made. In the 3 years since we've presented, Kheel has successfully migrated 3,480 collection records into ASpace, and we are now using it as our primary collection management system. 3 years ago, we had just begun to upload our collection data into our test instance. Now we have completed the ingest of all of our collection data into our production instance. This was accomplished in 2 phases. Our EAD finding aids were ingested by the contractor I had mentioned in the previous talk. Our non-EAD collections were ingested in a 2-phase process that our developer Jason Carpenter, and our metadata operations librarian Julia Carice oversaw, and we now fully use ASpace to describe and make available our collections. As for the things we still need to accomplish, we still have to migrate our accession records. We have over 10,000 accession records due to numerous accruals and our acquisition of the American Textile History Museum's collections in 2017. Our accession records ingest will also include ingesting restrictions data, agent records, event records, and we will need to create the correct linkages. The ingest of agents will be especially painstaking because they are shared across repositories, and we will have to be careful not to merge or overwrite agents. Because our restriction data were saved in our accession records, Kheel still has to use our old bespoke access database, KIDB, to check restriction data, check events in the log, and create collection numbers, which the database generates for us. Kheel will also have to completely retool our accessions workflow because there is no way to customize accession work for each repo in the instance. And since RMC went in first, we have had to adapt our workflows to match theirs. The use of user-defined fields has been helpful in addressing some of these issues and will be discussed later when we discuss shared governance. And finally, we are still using our database as our stacks management tool since it has a fully automated space locating tool that our ASpace instance currently lacks. Tali?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tali, and I am representing the Medical Center Archives, sometimes referred to as Weill. So for a bit of context, we are the institutional archive for both Cornell's Medical College, known as Weill Cornell Medicine, as well as for a 250-year-old private hospital, New-York-Presbyterian. We are a much smaller repository and also located in New York City, so physically removed from Kheel and RMC, with a team of 3 archivists who wear many hats to manage all aspects of the archival lifecycle. So when I joined the Medical Center Archive in 2021, I was tasked with evaluating collection management systems to find a modern, cohesive solution for archival description, as the ones in place were no longer adequate at keeping up with best practices. For example, the old system didn't allow users, including staff, to search across the collections. Now, the realities in selecting a new system for a small archive with limited resources is that the choices were largely dictated by the cost and availability of technical support. So with the opportunity to join a larger institution like Cornell's instance of ArchivesSpace was a very attractive option. So we had already began moving in that direction when in 2023, the decision to turn on the POI was made, and that prompted us to really actively start our migration. So I say we, but it's really me doing the migration, so it's rather slow moving. And so far, we've migrated 150 findings that were previously described only in Word documents. So that involved either manually copying a lot of information or getting a little help from Copilot to convert them into CSV files first. Also now, all new incoming accessions are added into ArchivesSpace as accession records. And unfortunately, we are still in that in-between phase where we need to reference both ArchivesSpace as well as our aging access database. But even having some of our collections searchable in ArchivesSpace, especially for the public, has already been extremely rewarding. Our biggest remaining task is to migrate the collection and accession records that are in this access database, which we will need to do using the API after a massive data cleanup. Back to you, Katerina.
So we'll talk a little bit about how we made that happen in terms of administration, because even in a perfect environment, advocacy ensures continued and sustained support. But even more so when resources are strained, it pays to be the squeaky wheel. So the more repositories in ASpace and having distinct needs meant that more voices were asking for support from different directions. It was clear to all very soon that coordination and collaboration was the only way to move forward. Admittedly, at first, the process was slow until external but crucial developments resulted in a new model for technical support. Gaps in the library administration and IT units were filled, and our new university librarian wanted better means to track special collection data and was open to advocacy. New assistant university librarians also added their support, and this led to more resources and dedicated developer time on ArchivesSpace. At our end, uniting our voices and coordinating prior to reaching out to administration or IT with our needs meant that all three repositories were aware of that advocacy done by the rest and formed a unified front so we would not end up repeating requests or competing with one another without really knowing that we do. We were able to use hard data by advocating to fulfill our needs and challenges backed by fiscally motivated justifications. For example, Weill Cornell was quoted a very high price by an external vendor for developing and maintaining a Weill-specific access interface. This supported work on the PUI. When top container updates in Folio were failing, so that boxes could not be physically be moved off-site, we translated staff frustration and unsightly hallways to cost of staff time performing repetitive processes or navigating workflow delays. This backed the request for dedicated developer support to fix issues. Another example was the increased developer support and resources needed to help Kheel Center's out-of-date instance in operation that Liz already mentioned. We are now at a much better place than the early stages, although still not ideal. IT developers and systems maintenance collaborate within a framework of Jira tickets and a sprint model. IT performs focused work on prearranged tasks for periods of 2 to 4 weeks at a time. Some of the work is in response to our collective needs, and some is necessary background work. This model works well to accomplish specific and manageable goals, but has its drawbacks. When IT is occupied in sprints on other areas, technical support for unexpected issues can be slow for us and challenging for them. In addition, if a task is not prioritized by repositories for the next sprint or it's not completed by the end of the current sprint, it either has to wait several weeks before it's addressed again, or the sprint is extended and throws off IT's project queues. I'll pass it back to Tali now.
So after the advocacy part, we recognized the need for a new group governance structure between all three repositories with representation from both technical services and public services to efficiently move forward. Especially for RMC, they now have to collaborate with public services on a new level on things like Aeon integration and decisions about aesthetics of the PUI as they related to patron requests. We also needed to track who was asking for what and making sure we were all pushing in the same direction while avoiding duplicate or mixed messages. So we've implemented 2 new modes of communication that have been working well so far. The first, we now have a standing monthly meeting with all stakeholders on Zoom, which significantly improved collaboration, decision-making, and project prioritization. Second, we now have a single Teams channel. It's kind of similar to Slack for those who are not familiar. And that helped simplify assigning tasks to the appropriate team in real time as problems may arise. Either they get tagged to the technical services folks or IT, which prompts IT to then add these issues to their Jira board. Another change to our governance structure was to expand the role of Julia Corias, a metadata operations librarian, to act as liaison to streamline communication between the repositories, IT partners, and metadata operation. She's uniquely positioned by both skill set and project familiarity to step into this expanded role. You may remember that she was the one who presented with Liz and Katerina 3 years ago at this event, which shows how vital her role has been throughout this entire process. Julia continues to help with generating reports and batch uploads via the API, which are all projects that benefit the 3 units. Next, decision fatigue has been made easier with collaboration. Yes, we have to agree on the decision, and that's why we meet in that monthly meeting. But so far, it seems like we do tend to agree on things, and it's been really nice to share the load of finding a solution together. For me personally, it's also been really nice to know that bigger institutions are often dealing with very similar issues that we are having in these on smaller institutions. Generally, our approach to decision making has been, if there's a solution that's already out there, try to adapt. If not, explore options and solutions together and customize if and when possible. An example of this was, for example, agreeing to utilize and mapping one of the limited user-defined fields for legacy information from past databases. And this applied to both our repository as well as Keel's for accession ingest. And of course, the work is not over. We are continuing to work through many pain points, several of which were caused by repositories joining after the initial implementation by RMC. An example might be we are still looking for a solution regarding the auto-generated accession identifiers that were already in place that worked with RMC, but it's different from what Kheel and the Medical Center Archive have in place. And something like that, it is much harder for us to adapt to. Back to you, Katerina.
So let's talk a little bit about the PUI, which has been coming up so many times so far. It was the first decision after a system upgrade that we made collectively, and we soon proved the point that there's nothing better in finding out your dark data secrets than making them visible to the entire world. For RMC, past decisions that were made during a Voyager and HTML finding aids environment, they made sense or they were irrelevant at that time, but that resulted in need for serious data cleanup. Nodes containing confidential or unnecessary information for front matter had to be either cleaned up or removed from display in the PUI. Indexing issues resulted in a number of collections not displaying fully or correctly. This required at least one global backend sweep to publish fields previously unpublished, and even then some collections still required manual refresh. This was exacerbated because of an unfortunate timing. Although we planned to launch in the middle of summer, when campus was quiet, delays in the backend work meant that we had to end up launching the PUI during the first week of classes. The end result was that all these growing pains were actually felt by many more users. Another, so to speak, mistake that we had to deal with was that we kept unprocessed boxes at the resource level. This makes them requestable in the PUI. All three institutions have different reasons why we need to keep them as is, but for RMC, the majority of these top containers should not be requestable until they're processed. So we are currently working on moving these top containers into their own unprocessed materials series, which are easier to restrict. Lastly, restrictions did not map properly in Aeon. Since in the past publishing a node did not mean anything, we had to reindex nodes as well, because it just would not show up. More importantly, though, long text restrictions do not display fully in the field box in Aeon, where public services access them, and Aeon does not allow a character increase in that field. So a bigger task of adjusting restrictions language to something that works better for our public services team is investigated. I'll now pass it on to Liz.
For Kheel, one of the biggest consequences of the PUI had little to do with our metadata, our collection records, or its adoption by our public services team. The biggest consequence for Kheel is that we had only completed part one of our two-part ingest of collection records when we began work on launching the PUI. As I had mentioned previously, we ingested all collections that had had an extant EAD by working with an external consultant. However, in addition to those roughly 2,500 resource records, we had another 900 plus collections that we refer to as the non-EAD collections. Because we only had one dedicated developer and because the PUI was so necessary given the numerous problems that existed when trying to integrate ASpace with our catalog software folio and with Aeon, our second ingest was delayed so that the PUI would be ready to launch in summer of 2025, although as Katerina just said, that was also a little delayed. And while I had standing meetings with our developer to continue work on the migration, trying to ingest complicated resource records while he was also trying to stand up the PUI led to compromises on our desired timelines. The other main consequence of turning on the PUI for Kheel was adopting other systems at Cornell that were integrated with ASpace. Specifically, we also had to start using Aeon to allow patrons to request collection materials through the PUI. This meant, in addition to implementing and learning both the staff interface and the PUI of ASpace, Kheel staff members and archivists had to implement, create workflows, and learn to use Aeon at roughly the same time. Another interesting side effect for us of turning on the PUI and Aeon at the same time and integrating these systems with Folio was that in addition to our collection materials being requestable through the PUI, other Kheel items that had only been described in Folio suddenly became requestable in it. For rare books and periodicals, this was fine and intended, but it turned out we had a lot of old, bad legacy records in our catalog. So a long tail of our PUI migration will actually be an ongoing cleanup of our Folio records. Overall, our public services and patrons seem to appreciate the PUI. The searchability has made their jobs much easier, and we are very much looking forward to using the digital object functionality to further improve patron access to our collection materials with no need for so much mediation from staff. The main complaint from Keel's patrons is mostly centered around aesthetics and the layout of the PUI as it is currently set up. However, Cornell is lucky to have a usability group who is planning to do some testing later this spring to help focus in on how we can modify the UX of the PUI to be more user-friendly and navigable by our patrons, while still conforming to the branding standards of Cornell University and Weill Cornell Medicine. As the meme says, graphic design is our passion, and we do hope to implement some of these patron requests and maybe also use some of those neat tags mentioned in the previous presentation. Tali?
The PUI has not made a huge change to how the Medical Center Archives provides reference services to our patron because we're not using nor plan to use Aeon, and the developers were able to turn that feature off for just our repository. But the launching of the PUI did have some major impact on our overall priorities, and for a small repository, that can have a really big implication on our day-to-day. So first, we had to quickly implement some things that may be considered standard practice, like collection and accession identifiers, while contending with pretty big gaps in our existing data. For example, our records don't have accession dates a lot of times, which is a required field in ArchivesSpace in order to migrate them as accession records. So a lot of cleanup that we were not necessarily anticipating doing for a while. Next, we are planning to do a full overhaul and redesign of the Medical Center Archives website next year in 2027. And that is because we are waiting for a institution-wide update to Drupal 10 sometime in 2026. Instead, since we needed our website to link out to the PUI and could no longer keep the outdated findings online, we had to immediately make some changes that are short-term changes and solutions that will likely have to change again in the future. Overall, we are hugely benefiting from following RMC and Keel's footsteps during our migration. And we also just found out that the Medical College's library will be joining Cornell's Folio integration. So we're excited and rather relieved to know that there is a roadmap in place we can follow to make our records also available in the new library catalog. Finally, as Katerina and Liz already mentioned, we are learning how to work within a structure of a larger institution and different operation styles like the IT sprints. One small benefit of a small repository is that sometimes we have a little bit more flexibility to institute quick changes without going through other departments or channels. And now we're, of course, learning to be a little more patient while larger, more urgent issues get resolved first before they tackle things like the UX and the aesthetics. Back to you, Liz.
So in the interest of making sure we leave time for questions, I'm going to kind of rush through this slide a little bit. But hopefully it's become clear that these takeaways are all things that we've already discussed. Change management is absolutely a must, and that really boils down to communicate. Communicate both with your partners in your instance, but also with your public services folks, and use their access to patrons to help further inform your decisions, and also think about ways to communicate the changes to them as well. As also discussed, adapting to both sprint schedules and to a shared governance model has been a a learning process for us all, and the shared governance has been very rewarding. As Julia Correa said in our last presentation, it's plan ahead, but expect the unexpected. To mangle an expression, no plan survives first contact with your patrons, which I think we all learned when our data was on display outwardly. And then finally, the two other points I will make is lean on your community. We are very lucky at Cornell to have a large institution with a lot of people with a lot of skills. But I will also say that the ASpace community itself, even if you do not have the resources that larger institutions do, the ASpace community really fills that gap. And finally, never underestimate the power of data-driven decisions to help move the needle. And so we have gone from Three's Company to, and this is for 90 sci-fi fans, a charmed instance that is powered by Three. Any questions? We'll be happy to answer. Thanks.
Thank you. I thought the title slide was cute, and then you ended it with a charmed reference. So you really got me. That's very good. And in the middle of it, you had a slide, multiple slides that said PUI and its aftermath. So you got a lot going on. But thank you so much. That was really good, and thank you for presenting. Again and coming back. That was really informative, and the points you made are important for this sort of work. And props to you for listening to your voice in a recording. I cannot do that.
It was not easy.
Yeah, no, I hear you. All right, I know we are past time, and some people may need a bathroom break, but we do have a few questions in the Q&A, so we're gonna do those, and then we will catch up later on. But we will take our break in just a moment. Hillary asked, do the three repositories share an ASpace style guide, or have you retained your different description styles? Also very curious how you're monitoring possible duplicate subjects and agents. Yeah, thanks for this helpful presentation.
I can answer part of that, which is we don't have a full style guide, but we do have, through our community of practice meetings, we discuss and maintain that. The bigger question for us is, frankly, the subjects, and this is where having Julia Carice and then our metadata authorities librarian, Mary Campany, who is really helping us because those do go across, and that has been and will continue to be a major area of cleanup. Katerina or Tali, feel free to jump in.
We are having shared documentation for the PUI, for how patrons are using the PUI, because this started after we all started working together. So we're always gearing towards making shared documentation for whatever we can.
But I would say if you're talking about, sorry, I'm losing my voice. If you're talking about style guides in terms of actually writing or finding A's, we don't necessarily share that part because we have such different, the nature of our collections are very different. But all of the other things related to more technical or navigation of the PUI, we plan to have that in a shared place.
Thanks. Yeah, any time you share repositories, those sort of shared record types in particular can get out of control. Joe asked, just to confirm, you guys are in one ArchivesSpace instance and 3 separate repositories, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Following up on that, do you all share one instance of Aeon?
RMC and Kheel do, while, as Tali mentioned, does not use Aeon.
Cool. Awesome. I'm pausing to see if any other questions pop up. But I also know people probably are ready for break. But thank you so much for this. It's nice when people come back and reflect on the work, and it can feel slow, but I'm sure there was a moment when you were watching the presentation to realize how far you've come, and that's always a nice feeling as well. Since no other questions have popped into the chat, we'll go ahead and wrap up. We are going to move into a break. I do see a question just popped into the Q&A, but since we're going to go ahead and move to a break, if someone would mind answering that as text, we could do that. I see Elizabeth's doing that. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move into a break. We are going to take the full 10-minute break. So we will come back at 11 minutes after the hour. We're going to go ahead and take that break now. We will be back 11 minutes after the hour. Thank you so much to our presenters, and we'll be right back.